Remember the Phoenix cycle meta? Or when Earthquake Mirror could deal over 1000 damage in just a few seconds? Sometimes you have probably screamed about some balance changes, but balancing Clash Royale has never been easy, and sometimes Supercell may have gone a bit too far. There have been some insanely broken metas you might have forgotten about, like the Mighty Miner, when he was faster than a Lamborghini. So, I decided to dive deep into every balance change, analyze the stats of every Clash Royale card, and determine the most overpowered state of each one. Before discussing the first card, I need to clarify a few things. In this video, I will not consider evolutions, and those statistics will be based solely on top ladder and grand challenges. Additionally, I will intentionally exclude spells, as they are designed to be stronger than other cards. The Archer's most broken state was between February 7th, 2023 and April 4th, 2023. Their attack speed was reduced by 0.2 seconds. You are probably saying that this is not a big buff, but in reality, it was massive. Before this buff, they were only seen in Expo decks, but after the change, they were practically in every deck. Lavaloon, Graveyard, Royal Giant, Electro Giant. They were too strong, so Supercell decided in April to increase their first attack time instead of reverting the buff. Archer's Queen most broken state was definitely at launch on October 2017, 2021. She was featured in 3 out of the 5 best decks in the top ladder: Lavaloon, Bridge Spam, and Royal Hogs. Just 1 week after her release, she had a 24% usage rate and a 54% win rate. On November 3rd, her clocking keep cooldown was increased from 11 to 15 seconds, and its duration was reduced from 3.5 to 3 seconds. Baby Dragon's strongest state was in the very first 2 months of the game, in both January and February 2016. He was seen in 53 and 52% in the top 100 ladder decks. Compared to today, he could stab his attack when the target died, and he had 10% more health. Balloons had several strong states, but I think the most broken one was between December 5th, 2018 and February 4th, 2019. Back then, Balloon had 27% more death damage, 23% more hit damage, but it had an attack time of 3 seconds instead of the current 2 seconds. During this period, Freeze received a major rework, making the Balloon Freeze combo unstoppable. The best deck at the time with Balloon was this. Bandit never had a very broken state, but I think her strongest period was between January and April 2019. These months were dominated by Bridge Spam. And guess who was always strong in those decks? On April 1st, 2019, she received a small nerf, decreasing her hit points by 4%. In January, she had a 28% usage rate and a 52% win rate. On April 16, 2019, even with the nerf, she was still in a very strong position, with a 19% usage rate and a 52% win rate. I'd say that Barbarian's most broken state was between January and May 2016. They were very strong compared to today. The main difference was that they were 4 instead of 5, but they had 13% more health, so they couldn't die from Fireball. During these months, they had a 40 to 60% usage rate in the top ladder. We all know that Barbarian Hat is considered one of the worst cards, but it had its moment to shine. Strongest state was between February 4th, 2020 and May 5th, 2020. It received a rework that made it very strong. In April, it had a 12% usage rate and a 57% win rate. Supercell on May 5th reduced its hit points by 19%. It was seen mostly in Graveyard and Royal Hogs decks. Bats were very strong between October 2019 and June 2nd, 2020. They had a higher deploy stagger and their attack speed was 1.1 seconds instead of the current 1.3. They were seen in many decks such as Manual Control, Mortar, and Mega Knight. They had a high usage rate, usually around 20%, peaking in May with 30%. Their win rate was between 51 and 52%. Battle Hero's strongest state was definitely at her launch on December 2nd, 2019. She had a 10% more health compared to today, and she also had her passive ability. In December 2019, she had a 14% usage rate and a 51% win rate. In March, her usage rate was lower, at 9%, but her win rate was 57%. She was nerfed on May 5th, when Supercell decreased her hit points by 10%. She was mostly seen in this Ram Rider Bridge Spam deck, deck and in golem decks. Similar to the bandit, the Battleram strongest hit was between January and March 3rd, 2019. On this date, the barbarian hit points were decreased by 13%. Even if this was the strongest hit of the Battleram, its statistics were worse compared to today. It had 8% less damage and charge damage, 6% less hit points, and a higher charge distance with 3.5 tiles instead of only 3. It was so strong because of the meta, dominated by Bridge Spam and 3 Musketeers, the two best decks for this card. In January 2019, it had a 28% usage rate and a 52% win rate, just like the Bandit. Bomber's case is a bit difficult, because one of his strongest hits was between March 30th, 2021 and September 6th, 2021. Statistically, this was his strongest hit. Then there were the first month of 2024, where on January 3rd, he received a plus 4% damage buff. This seems small, but in reality it was huge, because he could now one-shot goblins. But then, with the start of the favorite season, he received an evolution, which was probably the most broken ever released. But as I said in this video, I will not count evolutions. So I guess his strongest hit was in that January season. However, he wasn't seen that much because he was overshadowed by other ranged cards with an evolution, like Arches and Firecracker. So tell me what you think about this card. Bomb Tower best period was between March 4th, 2019 and June 2nd, 2020. It had just received that damage and was very strong. From December onward, its statistics were increasing. It had a 22% usage rate and a 56% win rate. It was seen in Loon Cycles, Graveyard and Minor Rule Breakout decks. In June it was nerfed, decreasing its duration. Bowler's strongest hit was in 2016, after he received his rework on August 24th, lowering the cost from 6 to 5. Right after the rework, it had a 23% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. He continued to stay between 20 and 30% usage rate in the following months. It remained in a strong position until December, and in January its usage rate started to decline. Compared to today, it had 5 range tiles instead of 4, and 8% more hit points. He was seen in giant beatdown decks and minor control decks. The cannon's strongest state was in the early days of Clash Royale, between February 2nd, 2016 and March 23rd. Its cost was reduced to 3 elixir, making it very strong. It lasted 10 seconds longer, had 32% more health, a higher attack speed, and a faster first attack speed, but then less damage than it does now. At the start of May, it was nerfed, reducing its hit points by 11%, but that month was actually its peak, reaching 60% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. The two most used decks were Hog Rider Trifecta and Golem Beatdown. Cannon card's strongest state was the recent, between August 2024 and January 8, 2025. A buff to its attack speed in August made it very strong. Just 2 weeks after the balance change, it had a 60% win rate and a 13% usage rate, making it the best card after a tower troop, the Cannoneer, and the best troop for both August and September. So in January, Supercell reduced the shield hit points by 8%. It was used in minor Evo Mortal Cycle decks, Evo Recruit decks, and Lockbait decks. Dark Prince's strongest state was in May and June 2019. On May 6th, his range was increased to 1.25 tiles, and his area and charge area damage were also increased to 1.25 from 1.5. At that time, he also had a larger area radius, plus 3% more hit points, but his charge distance was 3.5 tiles instead of the current 3 tiles. He was mostly seen in Bridge Spam and Golem decks. Dart Goblin's strongest moment is actually right now. He has only received 2 very small nerfs in his history. On June 7th, 2024, he received an 8.4% damage buff. As the months go by, the difference is becoming noticeable. He has an evolution, so we don't have precise statistics. He is used in Lockbait and Wallbreaker decks. The Electro Dragon's most broken state was definitely at launch on November 9th, 2018. Just a month after his release, he received 2 nerfs. His hit points were reduced by 5%, and his first attack time was increased to 0.7 seconds from 0.2 seconds. These were the only balance changes he received, making him a pretty balanced card overall. The best decks with him were Giant Prince decks and Lumber Loon decks. Electro Giant's strongest state was between June 7th and August 2nd. 2022. In April, the Electro Giant received a rework, lowering his cost to 7 elixir. This rework put the card in a weak state, so in June, Supercell increased his hit points by 9%, and he became overpowered. Combined with the overpowered mirror, which could add 2 levels to the card, this created a toxic mirror Electro Giant meta. Electro Spirit is famous for being the only card to never receive a balance change, but it had ups and downs based on the meta. Its strongest period was between late 2020 and the first months of 2021. In January, it had an 8% usage rate and a 51% win rate. It was mostly used in Royal Giant and Royal Hog decks. At launch on December 30th, 2016, Electro Wizard was incredibly strong. He received his first nerf on January 23rd, reducing his spawn damage but also getting his first buff, increasing his hit points by 9%. In the same year, he received 5 nerfs. He was used in Lava Hound decks and Bridge Spam decks. 1 month after Elite Barbarian's release, they received a buff that made them overpowered. 19% more hit points, 14% more damage, and a 0.1 second faster attack speed. They had a 26% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. The two best decks with them were Withhog Rider and 3 Musketeers. Those who played Clash Royale at the very beginning remember how overpowered the Collector was. Its most overpowered state lasted till May 3rd, 2016, when its hit points were reduced by 20%. In February, it had a 27% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. In March, the usage rate was 59%. Just 2 weeks after the nerf, the Collector received another nerf. By the end of the month, the usage rate was even higher, reaching 74% in the top 100 ladder. It continued to dominate for those months and was nerfed in July. The best decks with it were Trifecta, Golem Beatdown, and 3 Musketeers. Elixir Golem's strongest state was definitely at his release, on November 4th, 2019. In December, it had a 13% usage rate and a 52% win rate. It was nerfed in January, decreasing the health of every form by 6%. His best performing deck included Battle Healer, Night Witch, and Tornado, similar to the standard Golem deck. His statistics were very different from today, because he was reworked in 2022. Executioner has been balanced many times, but its most overpowered state was between September 5th and October 1st, 2019. Supercell reworked it, and well, he was so overpowered. His statistics were not very high, because another overpowered card, the Fisherman, was a perfect counter to him. Supercell nerfed him again on November 4th. However, they intentionally buffed him, only to revert the buff on October 1st. So its strongest state lasted 2 days. His best deck was Withhog Rider. Firecracker's most overpowered period was at launch on February 3rd, 2020, due to one simple stat. Her recoil range was 2 tiles instead of the current 1.5. This made her much harder to kill and more annoying. In April, she had an 8% usage rate and a 51% win rate. In June, she maintained an 8% usage rate with a 52% win rate. She never broke the game, but was mostly a mid-ladder card. She was frequently used in Hog Rider and Cycle decks. On July 7th, her recoil range was reduced to 1.5 tiles, making her easier to kill. I remember perfectly when Fire Spirit was so overpowered, between June and September 6th, 2021. It had just been reworked to 1 elixir, but compared to today, it had an area radius of 2.5 tiles, meaning it could fully counter a Goblin Barrel, while also dealing 9% more damage. In September, it was nerfed, followed by 2 additional nerfs in December and in August of the following year. It was frequently used in many cycle decks, like Hog Rider and Drill decks. Fisherman's most overpowered state lasted only 3 days, from September 2nd to September 5th, 2019. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any statistics, but we can imagine his strength, because not only was it emergency nerfed, but it also received 2 additional nerfs in October and November of the same year. He was especially strong because he perfectly countered another overpowered card, the Executioner. La macchina di Leonardo da Vinci, The Flame Machine is another hard card, because it is considered one of the most balanced cards in the game, along with the Electro Spirit. It has only been balanced once in 8 years. I believe its strongest state was between January and April 1st, 2019, when it was nerfed. In January it had an 8% usage rate and a 53% win rate. It was then nerfed by decreasing its attack speed by 0.1 seconds, which was a very small change. Let me know what you think its strongest state was, because I couldn't find much else. It is mostly used in Electro Giant decks and Royal Hog Recruits decks. The strongest state of the furnace was between the 21st of June and December 2016. It received a buff, where its lifetime was increased. Its usage rate was 18% in the top ladder. One of the most used decks was this miner control deck. The furnace at the time was very different. It received a lot of balance changes and reworks, but it is in a very bad position even today. Giant's strongest state was definitely between the 3rd of October 2023 and the 17th of June 2024. He became very strong due to this buff to his range. In January, he had a 4% usage rate with a 58% win rate, and the following month, an 8% usage rate and a 62% win rate. In April, he became even stronger due to the release of the Broken Dagger Duchess, who was strong against small troops, but not much against beatdown. This was the best deck with the help of the graveyard. Giant Skeleton's strongest state was between April and June 2022, before the Electro Giant Mirror meta. And guess who was the cause of this? Yes, the plus 2 levels mirror. Giant Skeleton had just received a big buff, so why not increase the buff with 2 levels? In April it was the best card. Look at this weird deck, but in reality it was one of the best at the time. His statistics are quite the same now, but he is not a very competitive card, and that was one of the few times he was stronger. Goblin's strongest period was between the 26th of October 2022 and the 3rd of January 2024. I know this is a very long period, but they were very broken, and it's crazy how much time they skipped the nerfs. Technically, they received one in June 2023, where the deploy stagger was increased by 0.1 second. Their peak was reached at the end of 2023. In December, they had a 34% usage rate with a 56% win rate. The two best decks with goblins at the time were these, both with Goblin Giant, but they were also used a lot in cycle decks. Goblin Cage's strongest state was between May 5th, 2020 and December 7th, 2021. The Brawler received a nice buff, increasing its damage by 6%. This was enough to make the card very strong. It wasn't broken, but above average. Throughout the year, it continued having stats similar to these, reaching its peak in the summer of 2021. In July, it had an 18% usage rate and a 56% win rate. So in December it was nerfed, decreasing the hit points of the Brawler. It was primarily used in Electro Giant decks, but was also strong in other archetypes, like Royal Hogs. At launch, Goblin Demolisher was so broken. On the 17th of June 2024. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any statistics, but I remember how broken he was. In fact, only 2 weeks later, he was emergency nerfed, decreasing his death damage radius, and attack speed. This wasn't enough, so in October his lifetime was reduced to 7 seconds from 10. He was still one of the best cards in the game. The two best decks with him were this backup respawn deck and this drill cycle, both containing the other broken goblin card, the Machine. Goblin Drill most broken state was before the official release, between the 12th and the 17th of June 2021. It was emergency nerfed and released on the 11th of July. Even after the nerf, it remained very strong until September, when the goblins spawned at death were reduced. It was used a lot in cycle decks, like these two, and was also very strong in this deck with Cannon Card and Bandit. The Goblin Gang's strongest moment was between March 16th and June 12th, 2017. In April, they had 64 appearances in the top 200 ladder. In May, they peaked at 88. The three best decks with them were Three Musketeers Beat'em, Hog Rider Control, and Logways. They were nerfed, reducing the number of goblins from 3 to 2. Goblin Giant most overpowered state was between the 13th of November and December 2023. He had a 24% usage rate and a 59% win rate. In December, the attack speed of the Spear Goblins in the backpack was increased. On December 2017, the best 7 decks had the Goblin Giant. It paired well with Rage, Little Prince, and Sparky. Goblin Hut overpowered state was between the 7th of April and the 5th of May 2020. The card received 3 Spear Goblins upon death, making the Hut overpowered. On the 12th of April, it had a 30% usage rate and a 55% win rate. The best decks with it were Miner Control and Elixir Golem. The machine was released on the 17th of June 2024. Its most broken state lasted only 3 days, until the 19th of June. The rocket damage was reduced by 33%, the rocket damage on the tower by 50%, and the attack time was increased by 0.5 times, one of the biggest nerfs a card has ever had. The best deck with him? Well, every single deck had the Goblin Machine. Even now, the Goblin Stein is one of the best cards, but their most overpowered state was before they received their first nerf, so just for 10 days. Between the 7th and 17th of October 2024, they were nerfed 4 times, but in December they still had a 43% usage rate and a 55% win rate. They were mostly used in log-bait decks and paired well with the P.E.K.K.A. Evo. Golden Knight's strongest period was between the 4th of April and the 2nd of August 2022. The buff he received made him very oppressive. In June he had a 15% usage rate and a 57% win rate. In August he was nerfed, reducing his hit points by 10%. He was mostly used in 3 Musketeer decks. Golem's strongest state was between October 2018 and January 2019. The meta was working in his favor. The Night Witch was buffed, so the deck was very strong. He was nerfed in January, when the pushback of Golemites was reduced. Compared to today, the Golemites had 22% more damage, but 55% less death damage, while the Golem had 28% more death damage. The best deck at the time with him was this one. Guard's strongest period is actually right now. On the 3rd of January 2024, they received a buff that made them very strong. Just 1 week after the buff, they had a 10% usage rate and a 57% win rate. In July, they also had a 57% win rate with a 12% usage rate. They are mostly played in Lava Hound and Evo P.E.K.K.A. decks. Hog Rider's strongest state was definitely in 2016, right from the early days of Clash Royale until July. There were fewer win conditions, and the Hog Rider was one of the strongest. In January 2016, he had a 52% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. In March, 35%, still the best win condition. In August, his usage rate was lower, mostly because of the addition of the miner and the nerf he received in June, where his damage was decreased. The best deck with him was obviously the Trifecta. Hunter's most broken state was between January and March 2021. He had a 20% usage rate and a 56% win rate. He was then nerfed on the 30th of March, increasing his first attack time by 0.5 seconds. The best deck with the Hunter was this one with the Royal Giant. Between Hill Spirit's release and September 2020, it was so overpowered. It took a few months to settle in the meta, but in August it had a 23% usage rate and a 58% win rate. In September, its heal area radius was reduced and nerfed again in October, but it was still overpowered. After the nerf, it had a 27% usage rate and a 55% win rate. So in December it was nerfed again. It was used with Ram Rider, Royal Hogs and Royal Giant. On the 1st of November 2016, after a difficult start, Ice Golem's death damage was increased by 74%. This was his strongest hit until the 23rd of January. In November and December, he maintained a 33% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. He was too strong, so over the years, he was nerfed 5 times. The 2 best decks with him were Miner Control and Expo. Ice Spirit's strongest state was between its release on the 4th of July 2016 and the 1st of November. He was very strong compared to today, because he froze for 2 seconds. In August, he had a 26% usage rate in the top ladder. in September 47%, and in October he reached a 67% usage rate. This deck with the Giant was the best at the time. Other strong decks with SP8 were this one with Hog Rider and this one with Miner. Ice Wizard's strongest moment was between the 6th of August and November 2024. He received a big buff, where his area radius increased by half a tile. In October he had a 13% usage rate and a 56% win rate. The best decks with Ice Wizard was this one with Evo P.E.K.K.A. and Ram Rider, and was also used in Lumberloon and Mortar Bait decks. Inferno Dragon's best moment was between the 12th of February and the 6th of August 2018. In March he had a 14% usage rate. In May he had a 21% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. The best decks with him were these two bridge spam decks and this Hog Rider deck. In August he was nerfed, reducing his range and allowing him to big knockback. Inferno Tower's most broken period was during the first month of the game. It had a 42% usage rate in top 100 ladder and was much stronger compared to today. It lasted 60 seconds, had 3% more health, and couldn't be interrupted by zap or freeze. It was nerfed on February 2nd, when its lifetime was reduced to 45 seconds, and its retargeting time was increased by 0.4 seconds. Knight was very strong between December 2019 and March 2021. 2020 was a crazy year for him. In April 2020, he had a 21% usage rate with a 50% win rate. In July, his usage rate increased to 23% with a 51% win rate. He was nerfed on March 30th, when his hit points were reduced. He was used in graveyard decks, logbait, and minor control decks. Lava Hound's strongest state was between May 2024 and today. The release of the Void spell provided great synergy with him, and was also an excellent counter against the Dagger Dodge. In July, he had a 10% usage rate and a 58% win rate, the time when those 3 broken goblin cards were released. In October, his usage rate dropped to 5%, but his win rate remained at 58%. The best deck with him right now includes Balloon, Valkyrie Evolution, and Evolution Zap. We all remember how broken Little Prince was at release, but when was his most broken state? Well, before the nerfs. Between November 6th and November 13th, 2023, he received his first nerf, which reduced the dash range of the Guardian. By the end of November, he had a 68% usage rate and a 54% win rate. He was used in 15 out of the 20 strongest decks. The 3 best decks were Lavaloon, Goblin Giant Sparky, and Golem Beatdown. Lumberjack's strongest state was between August 24th and September 19th, 2016. He had a 20% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. The Rage was nerfed, decreasing its speed boost by 10% and its duration by 2 seconds. He was mostly seen with Balloon. Magic Archer's strongest state was between August 5th, 2019 and April 7th, 2020. He received a nice buff, increasing his damage by 16%. He was very strong. By December, he had a 31% usage rate and a 53% win rate. In March 2021, he had a 26% usage rate and a 52% win rate. The best decks with him were P.E.K.K.A. Bridge Spam and Elixir Golem. He was nerfed by reducing his range, but the nerf was too much, so it was reverted, and his hit points were reduced. If you've seen my video, you should already know Mega Knight history. His strongest period was between his release and his first nerf on February 12th, 2018. To give you an idea of how strong he was, both his spawn and jump damage were reduced by 25%. In October, he had a 41% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. The 2 best decks with him were Golem Beatdown and the Hog Rider deck. Do you know what the meta minion was? That's how Mega Minion was called at his release, because of how broken he was. The strongest state was between his release and November 30th, 2016, when he was nerfed. In November, he had an 84% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. By the end of the month, his usage rate was still 79%. The 2 best decks at the time were one with Giant and another with Hog Rider. Compared to today, he dealt 10% more damage, had a 1.3 second attack speed, and had a range of 2 tiles instead of 1.6. Mighty Miner's most broken period was definitely between December 7th and December 22nd. 2022. He had just received a buff that increased his movement speed too fast, making him insanely strong. He could also switch lanes with the ability. You know that if he reached your tower, you were doomed. The 3 best decks at the time all contained Mighty Miner. The first was a Hog Rider deck, the second was a Royal Hog deck, and the third was Logbait deck. Between July 4th and July 24th, 2016, Miner was incredibly overpowered. He had more heal points, less crown tower damage reduction, but Supercell also made a huge mistake. They reduced his deploy time to 0.75 seconds. In August, he had a 53% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. He was often paired with Goblin Barrel and 3 Musketeers. Mini P.E.K.K.'s strongest state was between March and May 2020. In March, he had a 25% usage rate and a 52% win rate. In April, he was used in 17% of decks with a 50% win rate. In May, he was nerfed by decreasing his range. He was mostly used in Hog Rider decks, Logbait and Golem Beatdown. Minion Horde's strongest period was between the first day of Clash Royale and May 2016. In January, they had a 50% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. After the nerf in May, when their range was reduced, their usage rate fell to 14%. They were mostly using with Hog Rider. As I just mentioned, minions were nerfed in May. This knocked the Horde out of the meta, but made the minions rise in popularity. In May, there were seen 28% of top ladder decks. In June, they had a 31% usage rate. In August, their usage rate started to decline, but they remained very strong. The 2 best decks with them were Hog Rider and Giant Balloon. Monk's most broken state was at release from October 26th, 2022 until December 7th. He was nerfed by increasing his ability cooldown time by 2 seconds. His elixir cost was increased from 4 to 5. He was mostly used alongside the Broken Phoenix and paired very well with Royal Giant, but he was also common in graveyard decks. Mortar's most broken state was during the first ever week of Clash Royale beta, between January 4th and January 11th, 2016. It was so strong that it had to be nerfed after just 1 week. Obviously, I don't have statistics, but judging by how much it was nerfed, we can imagine how overpowered it was. Its lifetime was reduced by 20 seconds, from 60 to 40. After this heavy nerf, its usage rate dropped to just 1%. Then Supercell decided to rework it, decreasing its elixir cost from 6 to 3. Mother Witch's strongest period was between March 30th and September 6th, 2021. She had just received a nice buff that increased her damage. In July, she had a 23% usage rate and a 56% win rate. The 3 best decks of that season, Dread Cycle, Royal Giant and P.E.K.K.A. Bridge Spam, all include her. Musketeer's strongest period was between June and October 2020. She slowly started rising in popularity. In June, she had a 19% usage rate and a 50% win rate. In August, her usage rate increased to 25%. With a 51% win rate. In September, she peaked at 33% usage rate with a 53% win rate. She was mostly used in 2.6 Hog Cycle, Giant Graveyard, and Graveyard decks. Night Witch's most broken state was of course at her release, between May 31st and June 12th, 2017, when she received her first nerf. She had a 50% usage rate in the top 200 ladder. The best decks with her were Battle Ram Bridge Spam, 3 Musketeer Beatdown and Golem Beatdown. P.E.K.K.A's strongest period was between March and September 2024. The buff that made her broken was increasing her range. She became even more broken thanks to the addition of her evolution. The best deck with her was Bridge Spam. From Phoenix release on October 26th, 2022 until November 2nd, she was definitely the most broken card in Clash Royale history. The best decks with her? Well, every single one, because she was in every deck. Prince's strongest period was during the first week of Clash Royale. On January 11th, his hit points were reduced by 4%, and in the following 2 months, he was nerfed 3 times. Even after the nerfs, he had a 20% usage rate in the top ladder. By the end of February, his usage rate in the top ladder had increased to 24%, so he was nerfed once again on February 29th. Prince's strongest period was between February 29th and March 23rd. 2016. Her hit points were reduced by 10%. At the time, she also had a higher range and a larger splash radius. By the end of February, she had a 29% usage rate in the top 100 ladder, an extremely high number considering how difficult the legendaries were to obtain. In March, her usage rate increased even further to 51%. Between June 17 and July 2nd, 2024, Ram Rider was overpowered. Supercell reduced the distance required for her charge from 3 tiles to 1.5 tiles. This buff was huge, and after just 2 weeks, they changed it to 2 tiles instead. She had a 25% usage rate and a 58% win rate. She was mainly used in P.E.K.K.A deck with the 3 broken goblin cards and in Ram Rider cycle decks. Rascals were released on May 25th, 2018, and remained very strong until July 2nd. Supercell then nerfed them by reducing the Rascal boys' hit points and increasing the Rascal girls' attack speed. They were mostly used in Logbait and Hawk Rider decks. The following year, they were nerfed again. Like many other cards, Royal Ghost Most Broken State was at his release on January 4th, 2018. He was so overpowered that after just 20 days, he was nerfed. His damage was reduced, his attack speed was increased, and the time required to turn invisible was also increased. At release, he had a 73% usage rate in the top 200 ladder. The 3 best decks with him were Mega Knight Beat, Golem Beatdown, and Giant Miner Beatdown. Royal Giant's strongest period was definitely between the 23rd of March and the 18th of May, 2016. His damage was buffed, and thanks to that, he became incredibly powerful. In April, he had a 38% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. The best deck with him was this one that included the Lexi Collector, Princess, and Ice Wizard. The Royal Hog's strongest state was at their release, from the 27th of June until their first nerf on the 6th of August 2018, when their first attack time was increased. 1 month later, they were nerfed again, with their attack speed increased and their damage reduced. They were commonly used as win condition in cycle decks. Recruits are interesting because, guess when they were broken? If you answered at the release, you're wrong. They were obtainable in their draft challenge on the 20th of July 2018, and they were released on the 7th of August. They received their first nerf on the 27th of July. This was the biggest nerf a card has ever received, as their elixir cost was increased by 2 elixir, without any changes to their stats. The strongest period for the skeleton army was between the 20th of October 2016 and the 13th of February 2017. They were reworked, lowering their elixir cost from 4 to 3. At the end of October, they had a 46% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. The 3 best decks with them were Expo Cycle, Hog Cycle, and Miner Control. They were nerfed twice, with both nerfs reducing the number of skeletons. The skeleton barrel's strongest period was between the 12th of December 2017 and the 12th of February 2018. This was the first time it had death damage, which made it very strong. In January, it had 37% usage rate in the top ladder. The 2 best decks with it were Mega Knight and Mortar Bait. It was nerfed by reducing the number of skeletons dropped upon death. Skeleton dragons were overpowered for just 2 days, from the 6th to the 7th of July 2020. After they were nerfed, reducing their damage and increasing their attack speed, they remained popular with a 19% usage rate and a 55% win rate. They were mostly used in Royal Giant and Lavalon decks. The Skeleton King was very prominent after his buff on the 4th of November 2021, and before his nerf, on the 7th of June 2022. He had a 15% usage rate and a 57% win rate. In June, the number of skeletons summoned by his ability was reduced. He was used in the best deck at the time, which was Lavalon. Between the 13th of February and the 12th of June 2017, Skeleton were very strong, because their number increased from 3 to 4. In March, they had a 53% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. In June, the balance changes was reverted, lowering the number of skeletons back to 3. The best 3 decks with them were Expo Cycle, Giant Hog Rider Beatdown, and Lavalon. Sparky's strongest period was between August 2023 and February 2024, not because she received a buff buff that made her strong. She has always been one of the worst cards in the game, but because the meta was working in her favor. It was dominated by Goblin Giant, which has always had a great synergy with Sparky. In November, she had a 13% usage rate and a 54% win rate. This was the best deck with her. Spear Goblins were very strong between Clash Royale launch and the 29th of February 2016. After 2 weeks, they had 58% usage rate, and in February they had 60% usage rate. They were mostly used in Hog Rider decks. Did this forgotten thing ever had a strong state? Well, the highest statistic I found were in August 2024. Because it was strong? No, it was just overhyped. Whatever. It had a 3% usage rate and a 50% win rate. Couldn't find a single top deck using it. I mean, let's move on. Everyone is skipping this part. Why am I even talking about it? Tesla had many strong states, but I think the strongest one was between the 9th and 29th of February 2016. It had 29% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. At the end of the month, it was nerfed, and its hit points were decreased by 5%. 1 month later, it was nerfed again, reducing its attack speed and lifetime. It was mostly used with Hog Rider and Giant. Three Musketeers' strongest state was between May and July 2017. Players finally learned to play them correctly, and the release of two very strong cards alongside them, Badoram and Heal, made them meta-defining. In July they reached a 48% usage rate in top ladder. The two best decks with them were both beatdown variations. Tombstone's strongest state was definitely between the launch of Clash Royale and the 9th of February 2016. It used to spawn 6 skeletons upon death. It also had a lifetime of 60 seconds, but had less hit points. In January, it had 68% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. Valkyrie's strongest state was between June 4th and September 3rd. 2018. This was her 5th buff. Her hit points were increased by 7%, but what made the difference was that she made her first attack instantly. This put the card in a very strong state, so her attack speed and first attack speed were later nerfed. She was used in many cycle decks. Between the 7th of October and 4th of November 2019, wall breakers were so strong. In fact, their damage was decreased by 19%, and their area radius was decreased to 1.5 times. In December, after the nerfs, they had a 9% usage rate and a 55% win rate. They were mostly used in low-weight miner control decks, which, on the 7th of October 2019, got reworked, and oh my god, her damage was increased by 220%. She was literally in every deck. In November, her area damage was removed, her attack speed was increased, and also the first skeleton's time was increased. She passed to become so broken to the worst state a card has ever had. Wizard was strong between the 4th of January 2016, the day of the launch of Clash Royale, and the 29th of February 2016. His hit points were decreased only by 6%. In January, he had a 63% usage rate. Quickly, players realized how bad he was compared to other cards. Wizard remained for years at 0% usage rate. Expo in January 2016 was so strong. It was nerfed on the 2nd of February, reducing its hit points by 15%, and removed the ability to target air troops. It had a 28% usage rate in the top 100 ladder. It was so defensive. It also had a deployment of only 3 seconds, and a range of 13 tiles. Zappies were strong between the 9th of September 2020 and the 30th of March 2021. Their first attack speed was reduced, and this made them quite popular. In December they had a 6% usage rate and a 57% win rate. At the end of March, the buff was reverted, and Zappies didn't receive balance changes after this. They were mostly seen in the Royal Hogs and Royal Giant decks. And that was the strongest state of every card in Clash Royale. Some cards dominated for months, while others had their moment of glory before getting nerfed. But one thing is certain, the meta is always changing, and who knows which card will rise to the top next. So, what did we learn from this video? We've seen that most cards were at their strongest state right at their release, We also learned that the most overpowered card ever was the Phoenix, followed by the Night Witch. And when it comes to the most recurring decks, Logbait and Miner Control have dominated the meta, but surprisingly, Three Musketeers the Beatdown also had its moment. Let me know in the comments if you disagree with any of the picks. If you enjoyed learning about the history of these cards, you might also like this video, where I cover the story of the most hated card in Clash Royale.